Alright, you are welcome to study session 5, the colonial experience. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the conquest and creation of Nigeria. 2. Explain colonial administration. And 3. Discuss the colonial experience in Nigeria or of Nigeria. Alright, introduction. Nigeria was a product of British colonialism. It was the British that created Nigeria. Until this development, there was no country with the name Nigeria, and no people described as Nigeria. As a result of the role played by the British in creating Africa and the black race, most populated country, Sir ODeL said, God did not create Nigeria, the British did. Nigeria got its name from River Niger, an area, and it was so named by Miss Flora Shaw, a British journalist and later the wife of Sir Frederick Lord Lugard. There are 2 starting points to understanding the colonial experience of Nigeria. The first point is to review the previous lessons: the Nigerian ethnographic survey, history of kingdoms and chiefdoms from the earliest times to 1850, the Atlantic slave trade, and the 19th century jihad. The second point is to underscore the fact that without the slave trade, there wouldn't have been colonialism and thus colonial experience. This colonial experience thus began from the conceptualization of colonialism, the conquest, the creation, the colonialization of Nigeria, and the colonial administration. We began with the conceptual understanding of colonialism. Colonialism is a domination of weak states by strong states. This domination is motivated by various factors, including political, social, racial, religious, and above all, economic. Colonialism was exercised on Africa by European states as a consequence of their internal developments. Introduction. Colonialism is the offshoot of imperialism. Imperialism is domination. This type of domination can be formal and informal. Colonialism represented the former phase of imperialism, and the former phase of imperialism is represented by the present character of relations between developed and developing countries, particularly in the economic area. Informal imperialism included globalization and the use of the media from centers of capitalism to foster domination of the developing countries. So colonialism is the first and last phase of formal domination of African states by European powers. This process of colonialism began in the 15th century. The stages in the development of colonialism included exploration phase, which occurred mostly in the 15th century, the slave trade, the industrialization, and the beginning of legitimate commerce, and colonialism, or the direct occupation of territories consequent on the competition for raw materials and markets for different European powers. First, colonialism was the division and physical occupation of African territories by European powers. Until colonialism, the relationship between Africans and Europeans was informal. The conquest and creation of Nigeria. The British conquest of the Nigerian areas represented the outcomes of colonialism. The process for the creation of Nigeria began in 1849 and it was concluded by 1914. The agencies that assisted in the conquest and creation of Nigeria included traders, missionaries, officials, and adventurers. There were 2 methods for the conquest of Nigeria, and these were treaty systems and gunboat diplomacy. The treaty system was essentially used by the Royal Niger Company in the conquest of the northern Nigeria. This involved the signing of treaties of friendship between companies, officials, and representatives, the local chiefs and kings. These treaties were later on tendered as evidence for the presence of company and British officials in the areas. This was particularly during the Berlin African Conference of 1884 to 1885. Gunboat diplomacy was the second method used as a means to conquer the southern parts of Nigeria. At some point in the process, the treaty method was used alongside gunboat diplomacy. Usually, gunboat diplomacy was deployed when the treaty method failed to yield the objective. Gunboat diplomacy was the use of companies and British guns to intimidate the local chiefs and then penetrate into agreeing to their terms. The conquest and creation of Nigeria. The appointment of Mr. John Bedcroft as the consul in charge of the Bingt of Benin and Biafra is considered the official commencement of the policies that would result in the conquest of Nigerian areas. The conquest of southern part began in 1851 with the conquest of Lagos. The pretext for the conquest of Lagos was to prevent King Kosoko from continuing with the slave trade. In 1861, Lagos was annexed and made a crown colony. Lagos provided the bridgehead for the conquest of the rest of Yoruba land. Benin area was conquered during the Benin massacre of 1897 under the pretext of avenging the death of British officials. The Benin conquest moved into the Delta areas. The Igbo heartland was conquered by the beginning of the 20th century. The conquest of the North and the Middle Belt began with the activities of the Royal Niger Company. The trading company was granted royal charter by the Queen of England in 1866. The charter gave the company authority as the government of the area. The company proceeded to sign various treaties with local chiefs who purportedly put their areas under British control. As a result of the growth of the area under the company control and the size of its resources, the British government decided to revoke the charter of the company on 31st December 1899 and assume direct control of its territory on the 1st of January 1900. Colonial administration. Colonial administration was the tax performed by the British colonial officials over the territories they conquered. Colonial rule or administration was established in the north, west, and east, respectively. In the north, the British introduced the indirect rule system, which made use of the existing institutions created after the jihad to administer the area. The British authority ruled indirectly using these institutions. They included the native authority, the courts, and the police. The British officials reformed the system and ruled the chiefs, who in turn ruled their people. In the West, the British also used indirect rule system, and this was because the traditional political institution was similar to those of the North. There was slight modification of the system to incorporate the rising class of educated persons. Excuse me. In the East, the British tried to rule with the indirect rule system. This failed because of the absence of similar pre-colonial traditional political institutions. To make up for the lack of central chiefs, the British created and licensed institutions of warrant chiefs. The warrant chiefs were used as chiefs in the absence of chiefs among the Igbos. It was an unpopular policy that caused crisis in the area. One of the prominent crises was the Aba Women Riot uprising of 1929. In the Middle Belt, there was also the absence of chiefs. Chiefs and chiefly institutions were created. In most cases, Hausa people were used as chief. The development was unpopular and was in the case, as it was in the case in the East. As a result of the experiences with the indirect rule system generated, the British introduced a system of local government, and this was especially in the eastern part. As time passes, the British introduced different constitutions under which Nigeria was governed, including the 1922, the 1946, the 1951, the 1954, the 1957, and the 1960 constitutions. A colonial experience. The colonial experience described the experiences of different areas and persons in Nigeria under British colonial administration. In some instances, there were similarities. In other instances, there were differences. These experiences shaped the area's responses during and after colonialism. In the North, the experience of benighted and paternalistic. In the East, the experience was ruthless, and in the West, it was also ruthless. The experiences shaped the area's responses and reactions. The North was not eager for colonialism to end for various reasons and cooperated with the colonial authority. The Middle Belt, the East and the West opposed colonialism and worked assiduously to end colonialism. The colonial authority reciprocated with stringent measures and strategies to favor the North that worked with it. Summary of study session 5. In study session 5, you have learned that the British conquest of Nigeria area was represented the outcome of colonialism. The process of the creation of Nigeria began in 1849 and was concluded by 1914. Colonial administration was the task performed by the British colonial officials over the territories they conquered. Colonial rule or administration was established in the North, West, and East respectively. Thank you.